News Special Report. Here's Kristen Welker.
Good day. We are coming on the air with breaking news out of the Middle East, where it is now just before 9 at night. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has just announced a new phase of his nation's war against Hamas militants who control Gaza. It comes after Israel launched its most intense airstrikes yet on Gaza overnight, the whole territory without cell phone or internet, so the extent of the damage is not yet clear. Just moments ago, the prime minister said Israel is expanding its ground operations inside Gaza.
We decided on expanding the ground operations unanimously, both in the war cabinet and in our political and security cabinet. We did this in a very educated manner, taking into all the considerations out of responsibility to guarantee the fate of this country and the safety of our troops.
Let's go straight to NBC News correspondent Jay Gray in Israel. So, Jay, we heard the prime minister say they are bracing for an offensive that will be, quote, long and difficult. He said that they are prepared. They are, quote, more united than ever. What is the very latest there, and what is the reaction throughout Israel and on the ground?
Yeah, and we've certainly seen, Kristen, over the last 3 days, IDF troops moving into Gaza. But last night, things really ramped up. And that's what Benjamin Netanyahu was talking about now, that this is the next phase of that ground attack. And they do have troops on the ground. They've set up a defensive line on the ground there and are advancing. What you hear from those here in Israel is that they have been waiting for this next move, but they're very concerned about the hostages, very concerned about getting their loved ones home. We know that Benjamin Netanyahu met with family members of the hostages today, and they made it clear that those that are still in captivity need to be focus number one as these troops move in. And they're very concerned about what to this point has been the most aggressive advance we've seen.
I want to bring in our chief foreign correspondent, Richard Engel, who is at the border of Israel and Gaza. Richard, what specifically are you seeing right now? And is it fair to say that Israel has begun its ground invasion without officially announcing it?
I think that's an excellent way of characterizing it. A ground invasion is underway. We've been watching Israeli tanks and troops moving into Gaza, advancing across some of the open areas between Israel and Gaza, firing with armored vehicles, troops engaging with their rifles. So a ground invasion is underway. It is not the blitzkrieg that some people had expected. It is not a division-level assault with hundreds or even thousands of armored vehicles and troops going in all at once. Instead, we're seeing smaller tactical moves with troops, tanks, bulldozers, engineering units going in primarily in two locations, here in the north, in the northern edge of the Gaza Strip, and further south in the midpoint of the Gaza Strip, both to the north and south of the biggest population center, which is Gaza City. So I think it's important to understand this more as the start of a rolling campaign that could intensify in the coming days, could intensify in the coming months. The Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu just gave a speech. His military commanders also gave a briefing, and they are describing this as phase 2. That the first phase was an air campaign that we saw ourselves intensify over the last couple of days, and now we're seeing what appears to be the start of a potentially very long ground phase of this operation. This is not what we'd seen before, where troops went in, stayed for a few hours, and pulled out. Those were probing attacks. These troops are going in, and it seems like they are there to stay and fight.
And, Richard, I know you can't see into Gaza right now. You are there on the border, though. Talk a little bit about what the conditions might be like inside of Gaza. Obviously, there had been an attempt to get humanitarian aid in. Undoubtedly, you would have to think that this intensifying ground operation will make that more difficult.
Well, part of Israel's tactic has been an ancient tactic in warfare, which is siege. they're trying to cut off Hamas's supplies. That unfortunately also means cutting off the supplies to the 2.3 million people of Gaza. But there has been a very deliberate campaign by Israel not to allow fuel in. Hamas's biggest strength in this campaign is its tunnels and the fact that there are 2.3 million people living above those tunnels. And it has been incredibly difficult for those people. They have been suffering already because of the airstrikes. And now as it goes into this ground campaign, they will be coming even closer into contact with Israeli troops, not just firing from the air, but firing with cannons and rifles. So we are definitely into a new phase of this war, and how long it takes, well, if you listen to the Israeli Prime Minister a short while ago, he described it as the second war of independence, another war that Israel fought for its very existence.
Yeah, I noted that as well. Incredibly powerful when he said that. Richard, I want to ask you about the hostages. We also heard the Prime Minister say that he has met with the families of the hostages. Jay Gray was talking about this as well. The concern being for those families that this ground invasion will make it almost impossible to get more hostages out. We know that 4 hostages have been released so far. What is your sense? What is your reporting around those efforts to try to get the hostages out, Richard?
So the military spokesman for Hamas also spoke a short while ago, and he said that there had been attempts to free the hostages, and we'd reported on those extensively in the last several weeks. He said that Israel did not take those attempts seriously, but he said that the offer still stands, that they want to release the hostages in exchange for all Palestinian prisoners. He said that could happen all at once. It could happen in stages. So according to Hamas, they are still open to negotiations. I've spoken to mediators as well who say that despite what is happening here, the discussions, indirect discussions, are still ongoing. So that is one portfolio, one dynamic of this that is extraordinarily difficult. And the reason that Prime Minister Netanyahu is speaking to those families is those families are increasingly concerned about their loved ones who are inside Gaza for obvious and perfectly understandable reasons. And they are increasingly frustrated because they are watching what's happening here. They are watching this escalation. They are watching phase 2 of this war begin. And they are telling the Israeli government and the world, don't forget about our sons, daughters, children, grandparents who are held hostage in Gaza.
And having spoken to some of those families, we know that the waiting is just excruciating. Richard Engel, thank you for your incredible reporting. As always, please stay safe. I want to bring in Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis, a U.S. foreign policy analyst. Lieutenant Colonel, thank you so much for joining me. What is your reaction to what we are seeing and hearing, what we heard from Prime Minister Netanyahu, that they are now expanding their ground operation?
Yeah, I think there was 3 things from his speech that really stood out to me that I think give a big indication of what we can expect to come. The first one, he said that their objective is to destroy Hamas all time, and he brought up the example of Joshua and Amalek. And for those who may not know, that's the Exodus version, both in the Torah and in the English Bible, where Moses told Joshua to utterly destroy Amalek and wipe them from the face of the earth. So he is using very strong language that all Israelis know very well, and it's going to resonate with them very hard. The second one is, he said pretty emphatically, he said, those who accuse our troops of war crimes are completely wrong, and he had some pretty strong language against them. I think that's a pretty direct reference to Erdogan in Turkey, who earlier today, in front of a crowd of hundreds of thousands of pro-Palestinian supporters, directly accused Israeli troops of committing war crimes. I think that was a shot across the bow there. And then the last thing is, which you alluded to just a second ago, he said, this is basically our second war of independence. It is the mission of my life. So that tells you that he is absolutely committed and considers this an outright existential battle, and I think there's very little that they won't do to take this to complete victory. They have no intention of going half measures. They clearly are going all out.
Well, I think you highlight so many of the key points that we heard from the Prime Minister. Let me follow up with you in terms of their strategy. You heard Richard talk about the fact that this has been in evolution. It's been growing over time. And one of the challenges, of course, is that Hamas burrows in these tunnels. What are the challenges that the Israeli military is facing, and how do they balance that against trying to limit civilian deaths?
There's no easy way around this one. There's no good answers. They're all bad, and they're all bad for the Palestinian people and for the Israeli Defense Forces going in there. Look, we've seen this battle plenty of times. We've seen it in Fallujah. You've heard a lot about Raqqa in Syria, Mosul in Iraq, and recently Bakhmut in Ukraine, in that Russia-Ukraine war. All of them are nearly the same, as that they are extremely expensive infantry fights. Now, Israel has a lot of armor, great tanks, Nemer infantry fighting vehicles, very powerful, but those things aren't going to do you any good once you get into the city. They'll get them up to the fight, but from there, it's a man-on-man fight, and it's an equal fight on the ground between Hamas, who knows the ground intimately, much better than Israel does, and that's, I think, why they're trying to tell people this is going to be an expensive fight in terms of blood, and it's going to take a long time to get done.
When you think about this taking a long time, what does that look like in your mind? Are we talking about months? Are we talking about years, Lieutenant Colonel?
I'm not sure it can go years, just because I don't know that Hamas can physically hang out that long. But many reports I've seen, and it just common sense tells us that since Hamas knew exactly what the Israelis were going to do in response, that they had enormous supplies of stocks of food, water, ammunition in those tunnels spread out all over the place. So even when Israel takes out some tunnels, they still have other resources there. So they can survive a long time, I think. But it's not going to be quick, and I think it's going to be many months. You see that the Battle of Bakhmut took 9 months. The Battle of Raqqa took 7 months. Mosul was 4 months. So I think in the least case, you're probably looking at many, many months, and it can spread out, easily into next year.
It struck me the Prime Minister talked about the support that they have received from the international community. We know that President Biden has been very firm in his support. We also know that privately, he and other top officials have effectively urged Israel to slow their ground invasion so that they can try to get the hostages out, so that they can try to get humanitarian aid in. To what extent does Israel need to weigh both moving forward with this ground invasion, but also not losing international support if there is a surge in civilian deaths?
Well, I think it's a fine line that Benjamin Netanyahu and his war cabinet are trying to thread the needle, so to speak, because they have a lot of domestic pressure and diplomatic pressure from other countries not to go in yet, because they're working with Qatar. Qatar claims that they are working on a deal to get as many as 70 hostages released. And you better know every family member of all of those are saying, don't go in yet. Don't mess this deal up. And of course, the Israeli side knows that that's almost certainly a ploy and a tactic on the Hamas side to delay the invasion. They want to spread this out by giving people hope. And that's why this is such a horrible, heart-wrenching decision. And I'm not sure which side he's going to come down on it. It looks like that they're going to say, give words to say we want to help these hostages, but it looks like they're going to go in on the ground anyway. And unfortunately, that means that probably many of these hostages may die. And I would also expect, given Hamas's complete disregard for human life, they will probably kill some of the hostages and say this is Israel's fault and put their faces out on, social media. And it's just going to be really horrible. There's no good answer for this. It's going to be bad for everybody.
All right. Well, Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis, thank you so much for your perspective. We really appreciate it. Again, we are tracking Israel announcing this new phase in its ground operation. We will continue to keep you updated. That concludes our special coverage. We'll have much more ahead right here on NBC News Now, online at NBCnews.com, and tomorrow morning on Meet the Press. I'm Kristen Welker.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.